again, it was one of the recommendations in the government's review report, which says that in rural areas where basically they find it very hard to access services, that rather than let that situation continue, we needed to devise a solution, and the solution was something called a local area hackney. And it tries to strike a balance between catering for the people who genuinely don't have transport needs, or don't have their transport needs met, and then not taking away the livelihoods of some industry people who are actually trying to deliver that in the area. So it tries to strike the balance between the two. And what it is effectively, as it says, a hackney licence. But before it can be granted, the applicant needs two key things. He needs endorsement of a local not-for-profit group that's a registered charity, or a local business group endorsing the need for it. That's one step. Step two, which is the more important one from our perspective, the local authority in whose area it is needs to be involved, do a simple assessment of what the needs are in the area, and come forward with a confirmation that it absolutely is needed, and that it's not that the transport demand isn't being met in other ways or capable of being met in other ways. So that was brought in at the end of last year, I think it was around the end of November. So they're the key components to it. After that, the costs are kept low to allow it the cost not to be an impediment to people. And as regards, you mentioned the area knowledge, because it's local area of operation only, there's no area knowledge test. We just wouldn't do that. So there's no area knowledge test required because it's specific to a local area.
But there is, in other, whether it's taxis or whether it's hackneys, you have to have that area knowledge specific. The licence for this only allows you to drive this type of vehicle in this type of to operate in this area of operation only. You can't drive a taxi, you can't drive a normal hackney, you can't drive a limousine. But purely to serve the needs of this local, usually rural area, we're saying no area knowledge test. It just doesn't make sense. Like, the guy coming from the area knows far more about the area than any test or questions we could set for him. So that's not part of it. Okay.
On the car pooling or car sharing side, I think this is possibly tied into the draft regulations, where we've excluded from the draft regulations the need for people who were involved in non-commercial car sharing to actually get a licence, because there was a doubt about that. The phrase in the Taxi Act and the previous Taxi Act was, if you were carrying somebody for hire or reward, and reward is the key word there, you potentially had to have the driver licence and the vehicle licence. And definitions of what for reward mean are much wider than you might think at first glance. So to avoid any problem over literally an employer or two people deciding to share journeys into work that somebody could allege, they needed to be both the vehicle licence and the driver licence. We've simply excluded them categorically. So it's non-commercial car sharing only that's excluded from the licensing. In terms of insurance for that type of activity, my understanding is that there's no reward involved, that insurance companies have said that they're fine with that. That's not a commercial service. They don't have an issue with it, is my understanding. Even
picking up someone, if you were, if you drove from A to B, you picked up several people, that's not constituted.
Well, I think that's going probably further now than car sharing.
Well, that's car sharing. You could still say you could be picking up 2 or 3 people in different places. That's what I'm saying.
Potentially, as I said, my understanding, and it was on foot of the previous correspondence with the insurance company, is if it is genuinely not for reward, non-commercial, and is literally what it says on the tin, it is a sharing between people who probably know each other, that the insurance companies, my understanding is they deem that to be covered by a normal domestic and social use policy. However, if you cross the line and it becomes anything that's got a commercial aspect to it or a reward aspect to it, then actually you do need special insurance. On terms of what's called the driver check app that you mentioned there, yeah, the reality is that any taxi driver can actually be potentially driving any licensed taxi vehicle. So we couldn't devise a system that said Mr. Smith, taxi driver, can only be connected to this vehicle or that vehicle. Potentially it could be driving any vehicle. So we've had to devise a system that the driver tells us which vehicle he's driving. And in the main, we've had no problems in this front. And if a problem does arise, as I said earlier to Deputy Dooley, we have the information there to categorically understand what has occurred, and we would not prosecute somebody for that kind of an inadvertent, that wasn't their problem. On the wheelchair accessible vehicles, will there be a grant? It is our intention later this year, if these regulations are adopted, that we would try and put in place some kind of a grant scheme to try and increase the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles coming into fleet. It's important to us, and we need to do something on that front. On the remarks by the Minister regarding the criminal convictions in the industry, I didn't hear those remarks firsthand. I prefer not to comment on that. I just don't know the ins and outs. Garda vetting, as I said earlier. On the rank on O'Connell Street, yeah, we understand the concerns about the rank on O'Connell Street. There's been a lot of discussions with Dublin City Council and the taxi representative groups in regard to this. It's a very busy street in terms of use of curbside space, but I know the City Council have a number of options developed, and I think over the next couple of months there'll be some preferred option identified in that, and let's see if that meets the needs of the people.
It's the issue of the rank being on O'Connell Street, not to the side streets. And if that meant coming around from one of the side streets and having several spaces where you could queue down the side street and coming on even, that might solve some of the problem.
Well, I understand that one of the options would be queuing on a feeder rank on Carlbrewer Street, feeding around the corner onto O'Connell Street. Now, whether that has problems with it or not, I can't say, but I do know that is one of the options that is actively being explored.
Okay.
And it's going to take a little bit more time before a preferred solution emerges from that, but I think everyone is conscious of the sensitivity of that particular location. In terms of people changing or activating licenses, multiple licenses using the same vehicle, I think it was mentioned as well by Deputy, and I forgot to mention it. We're conscious that this occurs in a number of places. It is compliant with the regulations, so there, while it just mightn't seem satisfactory at first glance, it actually is compliant with the regulations. If they move the vehicle from one licence to another, their licence, the licence that took their vehicle off, now is on a timeline. They have to put another vehicle on inside a year, or else they're going to be timed out, and that is going to expire. So we'll see what happens over the next period of time. We are aware it's going on in a very small way, but as I say, when we looked at it closely, we couldn't say there was anything technically wrong with what people were doing. On the analysis of costs, I do of people entering the industry, I do think I did refer to that area, but if I say that it is our intention to do a fair review later this year, and as part of that fair review to gather information and publish information on what we understand drivers' incomes or potential incomes to be, and we would hope to get that out later this year. On the enforcement officers, from our point of view, because the taxi industry is a 24-hour industry, 7 days a week across every county in the country, we, with 8 permanent enforcement officers, that's what we have, can't police the whole country. So we very much rely upon a Garda Síochána who have the capability of covering the country, even though we totally understand they have pilot priorities at any time, and it all depends what's important at their point in time. We are going to supplement that, and have supplemented that for 2014 with the engagement of an external service provider, who we have 15 additional personnel appointed by that service provider. All of them are ex-Gardaí, and all of them, when the Taxi Act gets commenced, we're able to authorise them in the way we want to. They will supplement our own 8 officers, and we will do what we can to increase the enforcement level around the country using that resource.
Sorry, I'm not clear on how that works. You're saying an external service, right? They're not straightforward enforcement officers. They're just others in addition to the 8 you have. Is that what you're saying?
We tendered out for a contract to provide personnel to us to perform this role. We've taken on board a company. The company is Applus, the same company who run the NCT, and we have agreed with them the provision of 15 personnel to provide enforcement functions around the country, and all 15 personnel are all ex-Gardaí. Until the Taxi Act is commenced, we can't give them the same powers as our own authorised officers have. But as soon as it is commenced, our intention is they get roughly equivalent powers, and they can provide the same service as our own officers are doing at the moment. So we will have 8 plus 15, which is 23, I think, is it?
Yeah.
In place during 2015.
You have to deal with unlicensed hackney and taxi drivers, is it?
That's absolutely a key part of it, but it's also to deal with all the other parts of the regulations as well.
Just in relation to unlicensed taxi and hackney regulators or operators, do they have to be caught in the act of actually taking a fare? Is that the?
Yes, it's more difficult than we'd like it to be. Effectively, what we have to do is engage that driver, take the journey, pay the fare, and then we can prove in court that there has been a journey taken for hire or reward.
Okay,
and you can imagine with our own 8 compliance people, they're pretty well known around the country, so it gets very hard to actually do that. So we get a lot of cooperation from the Gardaí, who give us people from other counties to come along and take the journey. But it is a more difficult thing than we'd like to do, than we'd like it to be.
So is there a need for a change in legislation?
I'm not sure. We don't have a change to propose. So it's not that we have a solution and we're looking for legislative change. We don't. But I just want to point out that it is a difficult exercise to catch an unlicensed vehicle and driver, and prove it in court. It's easy to catch them. It's very difficult to get to prosecution subsequently, which is what it's all about.
I just wondered, there's a vetting bill coming up, and
the vetting is done by An Garda
I know
Síochána,
that.
so we have really no involvement in it. And I do know it is more difficult for them to get information from certain jurisdictions than it is from clearly from our own jurisdiction. But beyond that, I wouldn't feel competent to answer the question. On taxis being used for bus lanes, potentially by people, I have no evidence of that occurring. I am aware that there may have been some taxis in the past that were bought for that purpose, and because at the time all you needed was put on the roof sign and then take it off. I think it is the very fact that we've required these permanent signs on the front doors of the vehicle has diminished the attractiveness of that proposition. And pulling up in unsuitable places and possibly using CCTV, there is an issue. There is an issue with a lack of rank space in various places, and what is happening is drivers do queue in inappropriate places to try and gain fares. And while it is understandable to say, well, we shouldn't prosecute them or pursue them because the problem is the lack of rank space, actually it is the people who have stood in the queue and are waiting there for it legitimately. They're the ones that get just as upset at the fact that we're not dealing with it. So we get as many complaints about not dealing with it as we do about dealing with it, and we try and take a reasonably pragmatic view. We're not out there being terribly draconian in this, because we understand the difficulties. But as I say, the people who have sat in a queue for half an hour, they're pretty upset to see a guy ahead of them getting the fare rather than them.
Okay, Deputy Phelan.
Thank you, Chair. And it's to go back to the rural hackney licence, and I just want to know what evidence do you have of the uptake of that. It strikes me that we could possibly have killed 2 birds, maybe with 1 stone with this, if we had offered that small public service vehicle as well. But you might be able to explain to me, maybe they're not compatible. But I would imagine if I was living in a rural area, we're looking for the hackney licence, and this was another area in which I could perhaps move into, that it might make it more beneficial for me to take it up. And I think for anybody to take it up, it has to be incentivised, and the only way we can incentivise them is by offering a grant for people, because you will find that people in wheelchairs actually suffer and are the most affected because they live firstly in a rural area, but also in a rural area where there is no taxi driver or no hackney licence. But if we were to do a combination of the 3, we might have incentivised people in those areas to take it up a bit more. Now, you might have evidence to contradict me around that, but I think the grant assistance, if you could bring it on as soon as possible, because there are quite a number of people affected in rural areas where they cannot, in a lot of cases, get out of their own homes because they have no way of getting out of them. I actually think the World Hackney licence is a very good idea, but I'm not sure how many people are actually going to take it up. Okay, thank you.
Okay. One of the key themes in the rural area Hackney licence was to keep it low cost. So, my perception is if there was a really viable commercial service to be offered in that rural area, it would already be there. So we have to, our assumption is it's going to be somebody who possibly operates on a part-time basis using their own vehicle as it is now and provides the service locally. And absent any other service in the area, that seems the right thing to do. If we were to try and say, on top of that, no, you must have a wheelchair accessible vehicle, they're much more expensive and it may create a difficulty. It's something perhaps we may evolve to in the future, but I think starting off, we wouldn't want to do that. And as regards just servicing the wheelchair needs in those areas, yeah, when we do our grant scheme that I did mention earlier for wheelchair accessible vehicles, we are thinking about seeing whether we need to do it in a very targeted way. There are certain areas of the country which are more short, even if you look at it on a county basis, more short of wheelchair accessible vehicles than other areas. And I think we have to be reasonably clever about how we target this to try and get the appropriate solution where it needs to be.
Okay, Deputy O'Donovan.
Chairman, first of all, apologies, I had to go to another meeting, but I wanted to come back because this is an issue that I, as you know, feel very strong on. And the reason that I feel very strong on it is that I think it's absolutely totally unnecessary to introduce a licence which is basically, in a way, apologising for the fact that we don't have adequate Hackney services in rural areas. And the reason that we don't have adequate Hackney services in rural areas is if you talk to anybody at the moment who has a Hackney licence, there isn't a hope in the wide earthly world that they will be able to pass the knowledge test, which is currently being forced down their throat. And I would expect, Chairman, that you would have a fairly good knowledge of County Mayo. But I can guarantee you that if you go and try and sit the test for County Mayo at the moment, that you won't pass it. And I've asked this by way of parliamentary question umpteen times, that the larger the rural county that you're from or misfortunate enough to be from, the greater the likelihood you have of failing the test. And there's no doubt about it that rather than examining why it is that people are failing the test, and these are not people that are in any way out of touch with their local community, far from it. It's the test is out of touch with the people that it's expected to serve. And I've cited this example umpteen times and just nobody is listening. If you're from Shannonbanks in County Clare, you would be expected as a Hackney driver to know more about Carbelet in Limerick, Patrick Street in Limerick, Roches Street, maybe out as far as Patrick's Well. That would probably be your catchment area, and down into Castletry. But instead, if you're from Shannonbanks in County Clare, you're expected to know about Doolin and Clare and Ballynakelly and Loop Head. And you're never going to service those areas. And the reality is that rather than actually looking at knowledge tests on an actual functional area, they've decided that they're looking at knowledge tests on the basis of a geographical area. And I've seen one of these knowledge tests, and I've seen one of the tests that a person from West Limerick is expected to answer. On what street in Doon is the post office? Like Doon is probably 50 miles from Abbeyfield. Now anybody that's going to sit into a Hackney in Abbeyfield and say, will you take me to Doon? First of all, the Hackney driver is absolutely thrilled that somebody has sat into the car and asked him for it. And I presume by the time he gets to Doon from Abbeyfield, he knows where the post office is anyway. But it's just absolutely bonkers that you'd have a situation where you're in Ballahaddereen, on the Mayo side of the Ballahaddereen border, and you're expected to know about places out in Blacksod and Belmullet, and expected to be able to deliver the person there. There's nobody that can pass those tests, I think, adequately, and that's the reason that we're introducing this. Rather than examining why it is that, I actually agree with the concept of a knowledge test, but I think if a person is applying for a Hackney licence in Abbeyfield and County Limerick, they should know about places in Knocknagoshel, in Kerry, in Fanoog, in Ballylongford, and places like that, and they're not asked about them at all, and this is the area that they're expected to serve. So, my take on this is glossing over a much bigger problem, which is that we have a knowledge test which is designed to make people fail. And that's the bigger issue here. And there's an unfairness built into it. And nobody's going to convince me otherwise that it's like circle the wagons and the people that are in, well, sure, we don't know whether they're going to pass the test or not, but we can guarantee you one thing, there are very few more going to win.
Yeah, I mean, you have consistently raised the issue. I totally.
And nothing is happening on Chairman.
I totally
in
identify
fact
with
more
that.
people are continuing to fail.
And I think in many other issues here today, I think very much a common sense approach. So I think it's called common sense. So maybe there'll be some development on it.
Can I just, I have a question. Should a person in Abbeyfield in County Limerick that's getting a Hackney licence, should he be expected to know the geography of Knocknagoshel? That's a very straightforward question.
Mr. Cregan?
I don't know where Knocknagoshel is.
It's
I
the
can't
giant-
answer that question.
It's about 3 miles from Abbeyfield. He's not expected to know that, but he is expected to know about Kilbehenny and Doon, which are over 60 miles from Abbeyfield. Just crazy.
I know I can't satisfy you, so you kind of said that.
You can satisfy me all right if you would agree to revise the geographical element of the knowledge test. I agree that there should be a knowledge test, but the knowledge test should be based on the functional area of the Hackney, not an aspirational area. And I would say to you that would you please just admit that if you're from a large county like Cork or a rural county, God help the person who's below in Ballydehob trying to pass a knowledge test, because he's going to have to know about places that are halfway to Dublin, like Mitchelstown.
Especially nowadays when there's so much information digitally available and so on. So anyway,
I'm not going to win on this one. So it's, you know, we have looked at it before. Your request really is the following. You think that geographic areas, which are currently 26, should be subdivided into a myriad of local areas. I'm saying to you, I think from an enforcement point of view even, it's unworkable. That scenario is unworkable. Every one of these drivers are entitled to drive not just a Hackney, but a taxi as well, and a limousine. And for us to police, at the moment, if you get a licence in Limerick, you're entitled to actually drive a taxi across all of Limerick. You put an L on your roof sign and you're entitled to apply for hire there. I couldn't contemplate how we would do a system whereby that guy is can only do Newcastle or something
Have
like
you
that.
ever come across the Ordnance Survey maps? The Ordnance Survey maps break the country down into grids. I mean, it's a very simple thing to do. It's actually very easy that you apply the knowledge to the grid in which the person has applied for the licence. And if a person is picking up a fare in Limerick and they've been asked to drive to Donegal, good luck to them, because they're going to do well out of it. But by the same token, would you accept that the vast majority of their work is within inside a defined functional area?
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. Most people will operate in certain areas, but say a taxi driver in Dublin, you know, I don't know how you would subdivide Dublin, for instance, because and then expect us to enforce it afterwards. I couldn't see how we could legitimately. It's hard enough as it is now to enforce the fact that people should only be standing on ranks in the county that they're authorised to stand in.
So you're basically saying to me that there are no taxi drivers in Dublin at the moment using sat-navs because they all know Dublin.
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying that the rules that exist is that people need to pass the area knowledge in respect of the area in which they operate. The area to which they operate.
The area in which they operate.
Yeah, but the area in which they operate has been defined at the moment on the county basis, and it's been that way for many, many years now at this stage.
So do you accept that people in larger counties are at a disadvantage?
Funny enough, I don't. I think the people who are at the greatest disadvantage are the urban areas.
So a person applying in Carlow, which is the second smallest county in the country, or Louth, is at the same advantage as a person in West Mayo?
No, that's not what I said. I said the urban areas are probably the hardest ones to pass. Dublin is probably the hardest test to pass, because Dublin is a massively built-up area with a lot of information around the place. It's the hardest one.
Can I ask you as well then, do you accept at all that the reason in which these rural licences are being brought in is that because there is a dearth of availability of rural hackneys at the moment?
The hackneys have declined. Hackneys were there were 5,000 hackneys in the country 5 years ago. There's 2,500 now. Nothing to do with the drivers.
Do you accept that there's any correlation between the number of hackneys that have declined and the knowledge test failure rate?
No.
You don't accept that?
I don't accept that.
Well, that's, to me, is the kernel of it.
I think there is a problem, and what you know, I think what we're trying to get to here is that, okay, I can, you know, you have put up reasons why it would be difficult here to address it, but I think that there is a problem that needs to be, some inventive way needs to be found to actually, maybe not solve it totally, but it's, as outlined by Deputy O'Donovan, it is, especially in big counties, a major issue, you know, for people who are trying to pass that test. So there needs to...
A border area in a county, you're totally goosed. If you're from Athlone, you're going to be expected to know about places in Kilbeggan and Mullingar. Now, the County Westmeath would be a smaller county, but God help you if you're from Ballyshannon in County Donegal, because you're going to be expected to know about Mellonhead, which is about another 80 miles down from it.
I'm happy to something we will take another look at. I just don't want to overpromise that
Oh,
we'll
no,
see a
no,
solution.
no, but
But at the moment, nothing has been promised. All I want is for an examination to be done, and to be honest, that people should be allowed to be examined on the area that they service. I would say that nobody in Abbeyfield, for example, would have an issue with being examined on the geography of the Wa or Knocknagoshel or Finoog or Lixnaw or places like that, or Ballylongford. But they have a major grievance being asked about places like Oola and Pallasgreen and Kilbenny and Mitchelstown, which are nowhere near their functional area and which they'll never serve in. They will never pick up a fare in the square in Abbeyfield or be rang and asked, will you take me to Doon? Nobody will do that.
Yeah, for instance, I mean, the way the tests would be devised, that there could be some weighting put in favour of the functional area that the person is applying from. You know, there's lots of ways that this could be, you know.
If there's a willingness, Chairman, to address the issue that the person be examined on the area in which they serve, I don't think there's a problem then. And I don't actually think these regulations are needed. And I certainly don't think this new Fandangle licence is going to be needed.
So, okay. We've outlined the problem.
We'll certainly look at it again.
Yeah.
And will you come back to the committee when you've looked at it? Because I've been raising this, and this is not going to go away, Chairman, and every time the word taxi is mentioned in here, I'll be raising this.
You have on many occasions, and I support you on it, but maybe if you could come back after your deliberations on it.
If you give us a few weeks on this, please.
Oh,
we'll
yeah,
come back to
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
Not a few years, I have no problem with a few weeks.
Yeah, yes, I mean, whatever, within reasonable month or two or whatever, but that there would be some response maybe of a new way of dealing with it in some way.
We'll certainly have a look at it.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks. So are we happy enough? So I'd like to thank Mr. Cregan for the engagement here today and for the way that you've answered and engaged with us, and it certainly kind of clarified a lot of issues for members, and there'll be great interest, I suppose, in the regulations when they are fully drawn up and finalised. So there's no other business at this meeting of the Joint Committee. Is adjourned until Wednesday the 12th of March at 9:30 when we have representatives on posts read the post office network in with us. Is that agreed?
Tomorrow morning at 10.
Tomorrow morning.
And then 1:45 in the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.